What do you do when your weapon can't hit what you need to kill? In March 1945, American forces were pushing into Germany, but supplies were stretched thin. Corporal Eddie Novak, an anti-tank gunner from Pittsburgh, had a problem. His 57mm 8 gun could theoretically kill a Panzer at 1-200 yards, but without a telescopic sight, hitting anything beyond 600 yards was pure luck. Standard protocol: wait for tanks to get closer, accept casualties, hope for the best. But Eddie was a machinist's son, who'd grown up taking things apart and putting them back together better. So he scrounged a broken German sniper scope from a destroyed position, salvaged lenses from a shattered binocular, and spent 3 weeks building a homemade telescopic sight using wire, tape, and scrap metal. His sergeant called it Frankenstein's eyeball. His crew called it a waste of time. Then, on March 27, 1945, a Panther tank appeared on a ridgeline 1-200 yards away, preparing to devastate Eddie's entire company. Eddie aimed through his improvised scope, made calculations his officers said were impossible, and fired one shot. The Panther exploded, and suddenly everyone wanted to know how a junkyard telescope had just saved their lives. If you want to know how ingenuity beats technology, subscribe now. This is the story of the homemade scope that killed a Panzer. Edward Eddie Novak grew up in Pittsburgh's industrial heart, in a house where the dinner table was covered with blueprints, and the garage was filled with lathes, calipers, and precision tools. His father was a master machinist at Westinghouse, the kind of craftsman who could measure tolerances to 1/1000th of an inch by feel. "Everything has precision, Eddie," his father would say. "A machine gun, a watch, a telescope, they all work the same way. Understand the mechanics and you can fix anything." Build anything? By age 16, Eddie could disassemble and reassemble a car engine blindfolded. He built a working telescope from scratch for a high school science project. He understood optics, trajectories, mechanical advantage, concepts most kids never thought about. When Pearl Harbor was attacked in 1941, Eddie was 19, working as an apprentice machinist. He enlisted in the Army in early 1942, expecting to be assigned to maintenance or engineering. Instead, they made him an anti-tank gunner. His mechanical aptitude and understanding of ballistics made him perfect for operating the 57mm M1 anti-tank gun. The 57mm was a good weapon. British design, license built in America. Could penetrate 73mm of armor at 1,000 yards, enough to kill most German tanks from the side or rear. But it had one fatal flaw: no telescopic sight. Just iron sights designed for 500-yard engagements. Against late-war German tanks, Panthers, Tigers, even the newer King Tigers, 500 yards was suicide range. Their frontal armor was too thick. You needed to hit them from the side or rear, at longer ranges where they couldn't return fire effectively. But how do you hit a moving tank at 1,000+ yards with iron sights? You don't. You get closer and hope. By March 1945, Eddie had been fighting across France and into Germany for 8 months. He'd lost 2 gun crews to German armor. Good men who'd gotten too close trying to make shots their weapon couldn't support at range. Eddie requested a telescopic sight through proper channels. Requisition denied. Optics were reserved for sniper rifles and tank guns. Anti-tank crews would have to make do. So Eddie decided, if the Army wouldn't give him a scope, he'd build one himself. His sergeant, a career soldier named Miller, thought he was insane. "You're gonna build a telescope? Out of what, Novak? Spare tank parts and wishes?" Eddie smiled. "Something like that, Sergeant. Something like that." Eddie started collecting pieces during downtime between engagements. Every destroyed German position was a potential parts supply. Every abandoned vehicle held components he might use. From a wrecked Kübelwagen, German Jeep, he salvaged a rear-view mirror. The glass was precision ground, could be repurposed. From a destroyed German sniper position, he found a Kar 98K rifle with a shattered ZF-41 scope. The housing was ruined, but 3 of the 4 lenses were intact. From an American reconnaissance jeep destroyed by artillery, Eddie recovered a pair of M3 binoculars, one barrel completely destroyed, but the other held a perfect 6x magnification objective lens. His crew thought he was crazy, hoarding junk while they should be resting. But Eddie saw potential where others saw garbage. His father had taught him, every precision instrument is just lenses, gears, and alignment. If you understand the principles, you can build anything. The challenge was integration. Eddie needed to create a scope that could mount securely to the 57mm gun, without interfering with operation, provide magnification at 1,000 plus yards, withstand recoil without shattering or losing zero, allow quick target acquisition. He sketched designs on notebook paper, calculating focal lengths, magnification ratios, mounting angles. The math was complex, but Eddie had learned optical formulas from building his telescope as a teenager. For the body, he used a section of German rifle barrel, strong, cylindrical, threaded at both ends. For the objective lens, the binocular glass. For the eyepiece, the best lens from the sniper scope. For mounting brackets, he machined aluminum from a destroyed aircraft aileron, drilling and tapping holes with salvaged tools. The reticle was the hardest part. Eddie needed crosshairs that wouldn't shift under recoil. He used hair-thin copper wires scavenged from radio equipment, mounted in precise crosshatch pattern inside the scope tube, aligned using a field compass and plumb line made from fishing weights. It took 3 weeks of night work, using a portable lantern, filing metal by hand, adjusting lens positions millimeter by millimeter. When Eddie finally mounted the completed scope to his 57mm gun, using improvised brackets and tension clamps, Sergeant Miller just shook his head. That looks like something a drunk mechanic built in a junkyard. Eddie peered through the eyepiece, adjusted focus, and smiled. Yeah, but it works. I can see individual rivets on that Panther Hulk 800 yards out. Seeing and hitting are different things, Novak. Guess we'll find out. Sergeant? March 15th, 1945. Eddie's unit was holding position near a destroyed German village when he finally got permission to test fire his homemade scope. Sergeant Miller was skeptical, but curious enough to authorize 3 practice rounds. Precious ammunition, but if the scope actually worked, it would be worth it. The target, a knocked-out Panzer IV sitting in a field 950 yards away. Previous crews had tried hitting it with iron sights for ranging practice. Success rate, maybe 1 in 10 shots at that distance. Eddie's gun crew gathered to watch what they expected to be an embarrassing failure. His loader, Private Jimmy Chen, loaded an armor-piercing round. This better work, Eddie. I don't want Miller chewing us out for wasting ammo on your science project. Eddie positioned himself behind the gun, peering through his improvised scope. The image was slightly blurry around the edges. Imperfect lens alignment, but the center was crystal clear. He could see individual details on the Panther. Damaged tracks, turret hatch, commander's cupola. He calculated windage mentally. Slight breeze from the left, maybe 5 miles per hour. Elevation for 950 yards. The homemade reticle helped. He'd calibrated the crosshair spacing for standard ranging. Firing, the 57mm roared. 3 seconds later, the round struck. 15 feet left of the Panther, throwing up dirt. His crew groaned. Sergeant Miller muttered something about wasted ammunition, but Eddie was smiling. Windage was off. I know the correction now. Load another round. Novak, you get 1 more shot. Make it count. Eddie adjusted the scope's windage. Not the scope itself, which was fixed, but his aim point using the reticle. He'd built Kentucky windage into the design, anticipating this. Firing. This time the round struck the Panther's turret dead center. The impact was visible even at 950 yards. A clean penetration through armor that hadn't been hit in weeks of ranging practice. The crew went silent. Private Chen whispered, "Holy shit, it actually works." Sergeant Miller walked over, studied the homemade scope with new respect. Novak, I take back what I said about drunk mechanics. That's the ugliest piece of equipment I've ever seen. And it just made an impossible shot. 1 more, Sergeant? To confirm it's not a fluke. Miller nodded. Eddie's 3rd shot hit 6 inches from the 2nd. At 950 yards, that was sniper rifle accuracy from an anti-tank gun with homemade optics. Word spread through the company within hours. Novak's junkyard telescope actually worked. 12 days later, it would save all their lives. March 27, 1945, 14:30 hours. Eddie's company was advancing through a narrow valley toward a strategic crossroads when everything stopped. A German Panther tank appeared on a ridgeline 200 yards ahead, hull-down position. Only turret visible, perfect defensive placement. From that position, the Panther's 75mm gun could devastate the entire American column trapped in the valley below. Company Commander Captain Harrison grabbed his binoculars. Son of a bitch. He's got us pinned. We advance, he kills every vehicle we have. We retreat, we lose the crossroads. Call in artillery, sir? Sergeant Miller suggested. Radio's been spotty all day. By the time we get fire support, that Panther will have repositioned or killed half our column. Harrison scanned his available weapons. Shermans were 400 yards behind. Couldn't get line of sight without exposing themselves. Bazookas effective to maybe 300 yards, useless at this range. The only weapon that could theoretically reach the Panther was Eddie's 57mm anti-tank gun. Novak. Can your gun reach that ridge? Ballistically, yes, sir. It's extreme range, but possible. With iron sights? No, sir, not reliably. But with my scope. Eddie trailed off, suddenly aware of how insane it sounded. Harrison stared at Eddie's improvised telescope thing mounted to the gun. That junkyard contraption. You're telling me you can hit a hull-down Panther at 200 yards with a homemade scope? I hit a stationary Panzer at 950 yards, sir. This is 250 yards farther. Target smaller because it's hull down and it might move. But yes, sir, I can try. Try? Novak, if you miss. That Panther puts a round through one of our trucks and we've got 20 casualties. If you hit it, you're a hero. Those are your options. Eddie looked through his scope at the distant Panther. He could see the turret, the gun barrel, even the commander's cupola. At 200 yards, it was a tiny target. The shot would require perfect calculation. Elevation, windage, temperature, even the Coriolis effect at this range. Sir, I need 2 minutes to calculate the shot, and I need everyone to stay still. Any vibration will throw off my aim. Harrison nodded. You've got 2 minutes, Corporal. Make them count, because if that Panther fires first, we're all dead. Eddie began calculating. This was the shot that would either prove his father's lessons or kill his friends. Eddie's mind became a calculator. Numbers, angles, physics, everything his father had taught him about precision. Range, 200 yards. Elevation adjustment, 47 mils. Wind, 8 mph crosswind from right. Deflection, 3.2 mils left. Temperature, 52 degrees. Air density affects trajectory, minor correction needed. Target size, Panther turret approximately 6 feet wide at this angle. Margin of error, less than 2 feet. Ammunition, standard M86 armor-piercing round. Muzzle velocity, 2,800 feet per second. Time to target, 1.4 seconds. Private Chen loaded the round silently. The entire company had gone quiet. 200 men watching one gunner attempt the impossible. Eddie positioned himself behind the gun, eye pressed to his homemade scope. Through the improvised optics, he could see the Panther's turret clearly. The German commander was scanning the valley with binoculars, probably calculating his own firing solution. Eddie adjusted elevation using the gun's traverse wheel. 47 mils up. His homemade reticle had markings he'd scratched for different ranges. Crude but functional. Windage correction. 3 mils left to center. He aimed at empty air beside the target, trusting math over instinct. His finger touched the trigger. Every lesson his father had taught him, precision, patience, understanding the mechanics, came down to this moment. Sergeant Miller whispered, Novak, that Panther's commander just climbed back inside. He's about to fire. No more time for calculations. Eddie exhaled slowly, steadying his breathing exactly as he'd practiced with his homemade telescope as a teenager, tracking planets across the night sky. He squeezed the trigger. The 57mm cannon roared. The gun recoiled violently, but Eddie kept his eye to the scope, watching. 1.4 seconds. An eternity. The armor-piercing round struck the Panther's turret front at a slight angle. Not perfect center, but close enough. At 1,200 yards, traveling at supersonic velocity, the round penetrated the commander's cupola and detonated inside the turret. The Panther's ammunition cooked off. The turret blew completely off the hull, spinning into the air, trailing fire and smoke. Eddie pulled away from his scope, ears ringing. The entire valley erupted in cheers. Captain Harrison stood there, binoculars still raised, mouth open. That's impossible. You just made an impossible shot. Eddie looked at his homemade scope, bent wire, salvaged lenses, junkyard metal, and thought about his father. No, sir. Just precision. The company advanced through the valley without opposition. The destroyed Panther sat on the ridgeline like a monument to precision, or luck, depending on who you asked. But everyone who'd watched Eddie make that shot knew it wasn't luck. Within hours, word spread through the division. A corporal with a homemade scope had killed a Panther at 200 yards with a 57mm anti-tank gun. Officers who'd rejected Eddie's requisition for proper optics suddenly wanted to see this improvised device. A ordnance major arrived 2 days later, inspected Eddie's scope with a jeweler's loupe, and shook his head in disbelief. This shouldn't work. The focal length is wrong. The mounting system violates every engineering principle. The reticle is copper wire held in place with solder. But somehow, it works? Yes, sir, Eddie replied. Because I understood the principles. My father taught me. If you know how something works, you can build it from anything. The major photographed the scope from every angle. Corporal Novak, I'm recommending you for the Bronze Star, and I'm sending these photos to Aberdeen Proving Ground. Maybe we've been over-engineering our optics. Eddie received his Bronze Star on April 3, 1945. The citation read, "For exceptional ingenuity and marksmanship under combat conditions, resulting in the destruction of enemy armor and preservation of American lives." But the real recognition came from his fellow soldiers. Within days, 3 other anti-tank crews asked Eddie to build them scopes. He spent his evenings teaching them the principles: focal lengths, lens alignment, recoil compensation, not handing them finished products but teaching them to think like machinists. You don't need perfect materials, Eddie explained to a gunner from Alabama who was building his own scope. You need to understand what each component does. The Germans have precision optics, yes, but precision isn't the same as effectiveness. A crude scope that gets you on target beats a perfect scope you don't have. By April 15th, there were 6 homemade scopes in the division, none as good as proper military optics, but all better than iron sights. And critically, they were built from battlefield salvage, requiring zero supply chain support. The war in Europe ended May 8, 1945. Eddie's 57mm gun fired its last shot on May 3rd, a German half-track at 800 yards. Through his homemade scope. Clean kill. The crew celebrated with liberated German beer. When they returned to base for demobilization, Sergeant Miller pulled Eddie aside. Novak, you saved a lot of lives with that junkyard telescope. Not just at the ridge. Every shot you made with it was a shot that would have missed with iron sights. That's how wars are really won. Not with the fanciest equipment, but with guys smart enough to make what they have actually work. Eddie shipped home to Pittsburgh in June 1945, honorably discharged with his Bronze Star and a duffel bag containing his scope, carefully disassembled, wrapped in an oily rag, protected like a sacred relic. His father met him at the train station, older and grayer but still wearing his machinist's apron from the shop. Eddie showed him the scope components, explained what he'd built, how he'd done it. His father's eyes filled with tears. You listened. All those years I talked about precision and mechanics. You listened. I had a good teacher, Dad. Eddie returned to Westinghouse. Worked as a machinist for 37 years. Eventually became a master craftsman like his father. He kept the disassembled scope in his workshop, occasionally reassembling it to show visiting grandchildren. This is the telescope that saved Grandpa's life, he'd tell them. Built from broken German equipment, American ingenuity, and math. Remember this, you don't need perfect tools to do good work. You need to understand principles. Everything else is just details. In 1978, the Smithsonian Institution contacted Eddie. They'd been researching improvised weapons of World War II and heard about his homemade scope through military archives. Would he consider donating it to the museum? Eddie thought about it for a week. Then he packed the scope, still wrapped in that same oily rag from 1945, and shipped it to Washington, D.C. with a letter. This scope represents something important. Not about me, but about what happens when soldiers can't wait for proper equipment. We improvise, we adapt, we solve problems with whatever materials we have. The Army wanted me to wait for official optics that might never arrive. I built my own. That's the American way. Not waiting for permission, but creating solutions. If this scope teaches anything, it's that bureaucracy moves slowly, but creativity moves fast. And in war, speed matters more than perfection. I hope someone looks at this crude device and understands. The best weapon isn't always the most expensive or most advanced. Sometimes it's the one you built yourself because you refused to accept limitations. The scope sits in the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History today, in a case labeled Improvised Military Technology, World War II. The description reads, M1 57mm Anti-Tank Gun Telescopic Sight, fabricated March 1945 by Corporal Edward Novak from salvaged German and American optical components, used to destroy German Panzer tank at 1-200 yards, an engagement range considered impossible for 57mm guns with standard iron sights. Represents soldier ingenuity in combat conditions. Thousands of visitors walk past it yearly. Most don't understand what they're seeing, just some old scope that looks like it was built in a garage, which, technically, it was. Edward Novak died in 2001, at age 79 in his Pittsburgh home. His obituary mentioned his Westinghouse career and his Bronze Star. It didn't mention the scope that had made military history. But at his funeral, his son displayed photographs from the Smithsonian exhibit. He told mourners, "Dad never bragged about the war, never talked about being a hero, but he taught all of us this lesson. Don't wait for someone to give you the tools you need. Build them yourself. Understand the principles and you can create anything from nothing." That scope killed a German tank and saved 200 American lives. But more importantly, it proved that a Pittsburgh machinist's kid with salvaged junk could outperform military bureaucracy. That's the real legacy, not the shot. But the refusal to accept no when the answer should have been, find a way. Here's what they don't teach about war. Battles aren't won by the side with the best equipment. They're won by the side that adapts fastest. Eddie Novak didn't have proper optics, so he built his own. He didn't wait for Supply Corps to solve his problem. He solved it himself with wire, lenses, and machinist knowledge from his father. The U.S. military had research facilities, engineering departments, unlimited budgets, but a corporal in a foxhole built a better solution using battlefield trash because he understood principles over procedures. That's not just a war story. That's a life lesson. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. Drop a comment about a time you improvised a solution when proper resources weren't available. Share this so Eddie Novak's name lives on. So a machinist's son who built a telescope from junkyard parts is never forgotten. They laughed at his homemade scope. Then he killed a panther at 1-200 yards. And suddenly everyone wanted to know how he did it. The answer was simple. Understand how things work and you can build anything. Even salvation, even from garbage. Eddie Novak saved 200 lives with salvaged lenses and copper wire. What's your excuse for not trying? Remember, the best tool isn't the one you have. It's the one you build when you refuse to accept limitations.